With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning and welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halverson. Joining me is Lori Boyer. So today we wanted to chat a little bit about all these drones that have been spotted over the last week and a half, mostly on the East Coast, but we also did see that there were some drone sightings a few days back near Phoenix. So, heading over to the West Coast a little bit, this is very interesting. What do you think's going on here, Lori?
Yeah, they're being termed the mysterious drones. And I think that I really don't know what's going on here. I don't know if this is some way to get information to kind of spy over the areas, primarily in the East Coast. It looks like New Jersey, New York City is where a majority of these drones have been seen. It's wreaking havoc over there. And you and I talk about ag. So I had a few thoughts on what some of the implications to the ag industry might be in this. And there is some agriculture over in those areas, as we well know. So there is no pinpoint as to who's flying them. There is no pinpoint as to the reason that they're flying them. And I think that is causing a lot of unrest. And there's a lot of people, citizens in those areas that are pushing on the Biden administration to get a little aggressive in figuring out what's going on. And as a matter of fact, it is wreaking havoc with airports in the area and their flights and things like that. And these people are getting really nervous. I know the FBI is now in on it and trying to figure out what is going on. I was looking for an exact number of drones that has been seen, and I'll keep looking, but I haven't seen an exact number. But I know that there has been quite a few. They're flying fairly low, and people have been calling in over and over reporting seeing them.
Well, there's also been some Air Force bases that have had to close. At least one I know for sure had to close because of drone sightings. There was another base where the sightings were nearby enough to cause a little, I don't know if concern is the right word, but they were aware and taking precautions because of it. One or two people in Boston were arrested as investigations, and there was nothing necessarily nefarious involved, but just flying drones where they should not be flown. And one of the problems is that, drones are a relatively new technology and are not very regulated. And, I'm not very fond of most regulations, but some things do need to be regulated, and things flying around in our airspace, I think, is one of them. But it does cause some, there's a need to pause here and think about this because, just looking from an agricultural standpoint, like you were talking about, drones are becoming more used on farms, and there are a lot of really good applications for drones on farms. Talk about a much easier way to check on how your entire acreage is doing. Are there spots that are more stressed than others? And, you can get real-time images of what exactly is going on in your crops. And that's just one way to use drones. I've talked with companies that are using drones for pesticide application or different input applications. I shouldn't say pesticides, but, it could be fertilizer or what have you. But using drones instead of, crop dusters or driving through the soil, which can cause additional soil compacting and all those issues. But so there are a lot of ways that drones are used in ag. Once we start having problems like we currently are with mysterious drones just near our airports and things, the regulations will come. And are they going to be harmful for our ag producers?
Exactly my point. Exactly my point. Now, I will say this after what I just said here just a few minutes ago, that according to abcnews.go.com, Pentagon spokesperson Major General Pat Ryder says that the drones are not of foreign origin. So I did want to put that out there.
Right.
So that's what we know, and that's what I'm quoting as of right now. So we can be there with that. Another thing is that we do have a licensing system in place for drones. So if these drones are not licensed, and I'm guessing they're not, because if they can't track them back to whoever is out there floating these drones around, then that's another issue in itself, and it could get out of hand really quickly. And I think that's part of the issue for FBI officials right now, as well as residents who are out there. And, if you live under an area, whether you're in a rural area or even in an urban area, and something's flying over your house, you wonder what they're doing, and it becomes kind of a privacy issue to me.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't like the idea that just, anybody can have a drone out and fly over, your neighbor can have a drone and fly over your house, check into your backyard, see what you've got going on back there. And I personally, I agree, it's an invasion of privacy. I don't care much for that idea at all.
Oh, here's a number for you. Okay, I knew there was a lot of them, but this really puts it in perspective. Again, the same article, I'm still quoting the abcnews.go.com. In Massachusetts, 10 to 15 drones were reported hovering over a home in Cape Cod. A resident told police they were bright and they were hovering over her home for more than an hour. What does this many drones, 10 to 15 drones hovering over your home for an hour, what are they doing?
Yeah, that would be extremely concerning. I don't know. Yeah, can you go out there with your, we'll say BB gun and do
Yeah.
a little target practice because that's not okay. That's truly, truly not okay to have to just be hovering over somebody's house for an hour. No, that's not
And
all right.
to your point, when you were talking about, what coming up with rules and regulations that would affect agriculture, I think just in general, what do homeowners and property rights have as rights to be able to, as you say, use your BB gun or some other source to down these? Like, what are our rights? What are our
Yeah.
rights in airspace over our private property?
Over a private property when it's just a nuisance item. Not We're not talking about airplanes. We're not talking about, anything to do with the military. We're talking about just a nuisance from other civilians. How do you protect your property with your BB gun or your slingshot, we'll say. Um, if you can take down the drones with your slingshot. Yeah, that's concerning to me.
It sounds like a lot of people are worried about being videoed. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a concern, not just pictures, but video is definitely a concern. Another thing, and this is getting a little bit more into the conspiracy theory side of things, and this was even before this mysterious drone situation that we're talking about here today popped up, just watching kind of the evolution of drones over the past few years. And even where I'm at, there was a few days where there were quite a few drones that were going around eastern Colorado. People are wondering, like, what are they putting into the air? What are they dropping into the atmosphere or over your home?
Yeah, yeah, it's scary stuff. We're going to keep talking about this. We do need to take a quick break, but we'll continue the conversation when we get back. This is the AgNet News Hour, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina, and she is Lori, and we are talking today about drones. And from a couple of angles. Now, before we went to the break, we were talking about just the invasion of privacy involved when your neighbors, or they don't even have to be your neighbors, they can be miles and miles away, are able to fly drones over your property and possibly videotape whatever's going on there, take a look at any possessions you have on your property. Can they see in your windows if we're talking about it from like a more, urban aspect? There's a lot of implications here.
You mentioned some of the input applications that drones are being used for, or just to check on your crops to see what
Hmm.
areas might need to be treated or cared for. But drones are also being used in the livestock sector to monitor herds, to find lost animals that get out of the fences, and in some cases, even to herd those animals around as they move them
Yeah.
from pasture to pasture. I just wonder too, is that causing stress if the more drones that are out there that are not being used by an agriculture person who is using them for a legit purpose? If someone is just willy-nilly using these, I mean, that could cause your cattle to run.
Yeah.
It could cause even more lost animals out there. It could cause a lot of issues with them running through fencing. I mean, there could be some of those things going on too when we have this type of situation going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like and just pure stress for the animal too. Like you said, that can be such a big problem. Now I wonder if we're gonna lead, if we're heading in the direction of, how we have like land rights, if you have minerals on your land or oil on your land or something and you get land rights to your land. So you have not just your property that's on the land, but now you actually own part of the earth as well. Are we gonna end up with air rights so that you actually
Yeah.
will own, or you can or somebody else could own the airspace right above your property. I mean, that sounds, again, so far-fetched and like I'm, need to go put on a tinfoil hat or something. But but these drones that are causing these issues, I think, bring up some of these questions.
Yeah, it just kind of goes back to the discussion we had before the break on private property. What part of your private property includes the airspace above you?
Right.
And it's a whole new conversation, I'm sure, for regulators. What also really makes me nervous is all the geopolitical events that are going on with the war in Russia and other areas in the Middle East. Does this have anything to do with that? Is there any signals going on? I mean, we already know that the United States is being talked about with regard to how we're helping or not helping some of these countries. I'm just throwing this out there. Is this all part of that?
Right. Right. I mean, and who knows? It also could just be a bunch of, high school nerds that are causing a problem.
That could be. And you're right. Absolutely. You're right.
And I don't know, maybe we'll find out who is flying these drones, but the drones can be so anonymous, like you said, if you're not licensed,
Mhm.
nobody's going to know who was flying these drones. And how do we even handle that? I don't like the idea personally of forcing everybody to license their drone. However, everybody has to license their car,
Mhm.
you have to license other things. So maybe we are leading into where will have to make sure every drone is licensed. But then how do you even police that?
Exactly. Yeah, that was my point earlier, is that wow. I mean, that has a lot of implications. Do you have to have another government agency for that? What does this mean for taxpayer dollars? With new technology, it wouldn't surprise me if these drones can be able to mess with your signals in your home, mess with your internet, mess with your phone, and mess with your your ability to get electricity, things like that.
Yeah, that's really scary when you bring it up like that. What will we eventually see drones be capable of? You think of it, that used to be science fiction, but that's becoming more and more closer to reality. Very interesting. Such an interesting topic. I am going to enjoy seeing what comes of this, and hopefully we can, I don't know, work out these problems as they come along. But for now, we can't solve it because we do have to take a commercial break. When we come back, Lori will be back with her segment. I will be returning later on in the show. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. She is Lori Boyer, and we will be right back. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. How does the use of humates contribute to water conservation and improved nutrient efficiency in farming systems?
It's a simple thing. Humates are I joke it's the caramel in the nut roll, but what it does, it helps these soil aggregates form colloids. And those colloids are little clusters of soil that have macropores and micropores. Those micropores are what's really doing the work for storing nutrients and water. Through capillary action, those micropores can hold more water. And so by increasing those soil aggregates and increasing your organic matter, you actually increase that soil's ability to hold water and hold nutrients, and therefore make a more efficient use of the nutrients and water applied.
So I want to ask you a little bit about the company, if that's okay.
Sure.
And Live Earth, from what I understand, is celebrating 35 years in the industry. Tell us a little bit about how the company has evolved over those years.
Yeah, so it's interesting. 35 years ago, when we were promoting humates to do some of these things, such as nutrient use efficiency, at the time, fertilizers were very inexpensive, and some of these regenerative agriculture and soil building ideas were fairly nascent. They weren't embraced by mainstream agriculture and mostly encouraged by hippies and some of these environmentalists. So it's really changed in the last 35 years, where nutrient use efficiency has become a big deal. And all of a sudden, these ideas that we were talking about the 80s that weren't very mainstream are quite in the main now. And I joke that we were cool long before we were cool. We just didn't know it. But the truth is, to be a leader and a visionary in this industry, it took 35 years for us to really realize that these products are needed and necessary for modern agriculture.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Lori Boyer.
am visiting here today with Renata Brillinger. She is the Executive Director of the California Climate and Agriculture Network, otherwise known as CalCan. Today we will be spending time on the Cows Act. But first, Renata, tell us more about yourself and your background and what CalCan is and does.
Well, I live in California. I live in just north of the Bay Area, and I've been working in and around sustainable agriculture and food systems for 3 decades, maybe, all in the nonprofit sector, really just looking for ways to improve our food system and our farming system in such that farmers are well economically supported and we have healthy food and workers are taken care of in the agricultural space. So that's taken different forms. We started CalCan in 2009. And at that time, there was no advocacy voice who was really trying to find constructive ways to both solve climate change and support farmers. And at the same time, we had a law in California that required that we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And so we really saw an opportunity to start looking for ways that farmers and ranchers could be supported in reducing emissions and staying in business.
Thank you for the background on CalCan, Renata. Let's specifically talk now about the Cows Act. What is this exactly?
So the Cows Act is a marker bill, and it's so a marker bill, when it comes to the Farm Bill, a marker bill is intended to as a vehicle really for dialogue and negotiation and debate. And so eventually the idea with a marker bill is that it becomes part of the Farm Bill. And this is very common. This is how the Farm Bill is basically built, is by a lot of different members of Congress introducing these marker bills, and then they, kind of test for their support. And then if they're popular, then they get woven into the Farm Bill. So we worked with an author to introduce the Cows Act in 2023. Yeah, but we still don't have a Farm Bill. So therefore we still don't have a Cows Act.
What exactly does this marker bill do?
It is an attempt to replicate a very popular program that has been around in California for 7 years. The idea would be that it basically make this program available to dairy producers across the country by virtue of being in the Farm Bill. So we have this program in California. It's been extremely popular. It's reduced methane emissions, and it's also helped growers economically in various ways, practical ways as well. And we want to see that exported to the whole country. We want to see it available widely. Essentially, what the program does is it provides grants to farmers, dairy farmers mainly, to install equipment that helps them change the way they manage their manure. So right now, in many parts of the country, dairy producers flush the manure out of the barns and it goes into these big lagoons, for storage. And then every once in a while, they'll dredge those out, get all the solids out of there and put them on fields, or they'll fertigate with it. They'll spray it out on their fields or neighbors' fields. But it's not, that practice isn't as environmentally friendly as we'd like to see. It creates major methane emissions. This is a greenhouse gas, a global warming gas. And it also means that those solids that are actually very valuable for fertilizer don't get utilized very well. So the Cows Act funds farmers to do with grants to, instead of that practice, scrape all those solids into compost piles, turn it into compost, and then use the compost as a substitute for synthetic fertilizers on their row crops or orchards or hay fields or whatever they want, their rangeland. This does a number of things. It reduces the methane emissions on those farms. It gives farmers a very valuable product, the compost, and it saves them a lot of labor and water. So it's got an economic value as well.
So when you say converting it into the compost and using grants to do that, like what kinds of technology or equipment, what kinds of things constitute those changes?
Yeah, very simple stuff, actually. It's not very high tech. And it can be very much sort of made to fit for any particular dairy producer. And this is a really important thing about agriculture. Every farm's different. So, this program is very flexible. It allows farmers to choose the kind of technology or equipment that's most appropriate for their situation. But some examples of the kinds of equipment is like an auger or a sort of a press screw. They can press the liquid and separate the solids from the liquid. They can run it over a screen, where the solids stay on top and the water drops through. They can get money for aerating their ponds so that there's more oxygen in there, and that reduces methane emissions. It also reduces smells and ammonia. There's a lot of different types of equipment that qualify. They can get these big, like sort of mechanical scrapers, that just scrape the manure right out of the alleys and the barns. It's very up, dependent on each farmer. They can also get these compost turners. Those are something that's eligible. So once they've got the waste all in a big windrow, they can get equipment that aerates those piles so that they compost well and quickly. They can get money for slabs, and they can get money for roofing so that the compost is protected from rain.
It sounds like those are all really good things and not overly hard, I guess, in a context of a big dairy operation. So why would a producer not do that?
On their own, yeah. Well, the practices are best. They're most suitable for the smaller and medium-sized producers, and who don't have a lot of capital, to burn. Dairy producers across the country right now are struggling to stay in business. The price of milk has, been below the cost of production for a long time. There's a lot of uncertainty in the business, and so the idea of investing what could be up to $700,000 is because that's about what they cost. I mean, depending on the size of the farm or what system you choose, it can range here in California between $500,000 and $750,000. It's just really hard for producers who are hand to mouth and losing money every year to invest that, or take a loan out for that kind of capital expenditure when they don't know if they're going to be in business in 5 years. And what we've heard from producers on the ground here in California is that having this investment in their operation actually helps close that profit margin gap that they're facing, because, as I said earlier, they're saving water. They're not having to truck in synthetic fertilizer and spread it on their fields. They're saving on labor, because as it is now, they have to figure out where to get rid of all this very large volumes of this liquid manure, and that requires human labor to drive it out in trucks and spray it on fields. So there's all kinds of places that farmers are finding they're cutting costs, and that helps them with their economic viability.
To date, what would you say, either in terms of a number or in percentage, that California dairies have went ahead and moved over into this composting system?
Ooh, yeah, that's a number I don't have at the top of my mind.
Would you say a lot, or would you say there still needs a lot of work to be done?
There's no doubt there's a lot of work to be done. What I can say is that the demand for the program has been roughly 3 times more than there has been funding.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that answered that question, I think. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's a very, very popular program. There's the limitation for rolling it out here in California is just not having the money. And that's another reason we wanted the COWS Act to move forward, because not only will it help dairy producers in other parts of the country, but it'll help California have a stronger source of revenue. And we're the first biggest. No, I think we're second behind Texas dairy state.
And Renata, the COWS Act, just to clarify on that, is just for California?
No, it's it would be a part of the National Farm Bill. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That's what I thought. But then I thought, well, maybe I misunderstood you. So I just want to clarify. That's why we're doing this interview. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, no, it would complement the California program. The California program has a different name. It's called the Alternative Manure Management Program.
Okay.
But because we don't have enough money here to meet the demand, it will help dairy producers here as well.
I am talking with Renata Brillinger. She is the Executive Director of the California Climate and Agriculture Network, also known as CalCan, and we'll continue our conversation with her right after this. Welcome back. I'm talking here today with Renata Berlinger. She is the Executive Director of the California Climate and Agriculture Network. In addition to the COWS Act, which we just got done talking about before the break, what are other things that CalCan works on?
Well, excuse me, we have been long champions of a couple of other programs that do very similar things. They reduce greenhouse gases on farms and provide revenue streams for farmers. They have economic benefits. So, for example, there's a healthy soils program, very popular again. 2 or 3 times more farmers apply for these grants than there's money available. And what that grant program does is it again gives grants to farmers for doing new practices that improve soil health and therefore reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this is very, very familiar things to growers, like applying compost or using cover crops, reducing tillage, putting in hedgerows or other kinds of perennial crops as around fields or along riparian areas. These all have climate benefits, and they also have a whole bunch of other co-benefits for farmers. That program is also underfunded, and there's a bill in the Congress as well that would be another marker bill that would allow states to use federal funding to incentivize those kinds of practices. Another program that we've been champions of is an on-farm water conservation program that gives grants to farmers to reduce their water use and their energy use, because it takes energy to pump water. So this would be things like more efficient irrigation or solar solar pumps on wells, soil moisture monitoring equipment so that farmers can more precisely figure out how much water they need to apply. So these are just examples of the win-win, that we're seeking when we look for solutions that both reduce emissions, and help address climate change, but also help farmers stay in business. And that's work we've been doing for a long time. We continue to advocate for the funding for it and continually to, try to improve the program, get the word out to farmers that these exist, and that regardless of, your political beliefs or your location in the country, we think these should be available for all farmers because they're just incredibly helpful from a practical point of view.
Okay. Well, good conversation, very educational. Maybe I'll follow up with you. We talk about those other programs, but the conclusion to all this is a farm bill is very important for CalCan and the work you're doing there.
It's important for farmers across the country, and actually it'll be timely because right now the Congress is trying to debate whether to extend the farm bill. These programs won't be in an extension. We need a new farm bill to get these programs in.
Oh yeah.
But we also need, in the meantime, we need the Congress to extend the farm bill because there are important things that are.
I want to thank my guests for joining me here today. Renata Berlinger, Executive Director of the California Climate and Agriculture Network. I'm Lori Boyer, and we will be right back with Sabrina Halverson.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. How does the use of humates contribute to water conservation and improved nutrient efficiency in farming systems?
It's a simple thing. Humates are I joke it's the caramel in the nut roll, but what it does, it helps these soil aggregates form colloids. And those colloids are little clusters of soil that have macropores and micropores. Those micropores are what's really doing the work for storing nutrients and water. Through capillary action, those micropores can hold more water. And so by increasing those soil aggregates and increasing your organic matter, you actually increase that soil's ability to hold water and hold nutrients, and therefore make a more efficient use of the nutrients and water applied.
So I want to ask you a little bit about the company, if that's okay.
Sure.
And Live Earth, from what I understand, is celebrating 35 years in the industry. Tell us a little bit about how the company has evolved over those years.
Yeah, so it's interesting. 35 years ago, when we were promoting humates to do some of these things, such as nutrient use efficiency, at the time, fertilizers were very inexpensive, and some of these regenerative agriculture and soil building ideas were fairly nascent. They weren't embraced by mainstream agriculture, and mostly encouraged by hippies and some of these environmentalists. So it's really changed in the last 35 years where nutrient use efficiency has become a big deal. And all of a sudden, these ideas that we were talking about the 80s that weren't very mainstream are quite in the main now. And I joke that we were cool long before we were cool. We just didn't know it. But the truth is, to be a leader and a visionary in this industry, it took 35 years for us to really realize that these products are needed and necessary for modern agriculture.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
It's time for this week's Almond Update, brought to you by the Almond Board of California. You can find them online at almonds.com. For the Almond Update this week, I'm talking with Gabriele Ludwig. She is the Director of Environmental Affairs with the Almond Board of California. We caught up at the recent Almond Conference. We are here at the Almond Conference, where we just wrapped up a session that you were moderating on post-harvest pest control for almonds. So if you can just give me a couple of highlights for our listeners who couldn't be here.
Okay, well, let me first just remind people what post-harvest pest control means in almonds. So realize we need pest control in the stockpile when the almonds come in from the field, pest control within the facility or the hull or sheller, and then typically you need pest control for making sure that when the load leaves that it meets either phytosanitary requirements or you don't have pests happen after it leaves the facility. So just first that reminder. In terms of the highlights here, really a couple of things. The focus was on integrated pest management for that post-harvest side. So first issue was really how do you do a better job of preventing the pests? And we had Eric Myers from ADM really go into looking at how do you find where these pests are harboring and really targeting either cleanup or treatment to those areas, because that ultimately will minimize the amount of pests that you have within the facility that can then keep reinfesting incoming product. And I thought it was really interesting to see, I can't say some of the things I didn't really want to see, but see some of the examples he gave of where the pests can be hidden, but really that mindset of not just assuming you need to treat, but also thinking about why are those pests showing up where they are and which pests are showing up, because again, the type of pests also gives you an idea of where you might need to look. The other highlight was really Dr. Zhongli Pan was really talking about some totally new tools to do monitoring. So the second step of IPM is monitoring for your pests. And he's showing some tools that you can put inside bins or inside a stockpile and monitor both temperature and moisture, but also actually detection of pests and start seeing, are you starting to see some pests increasing and maybe it's time to treat. Again, second part of IPM is you only treat if you have to, and this is a tool that will help folks with stockpiles and or in the facility to see, do I have pests building up that I might need to treat. And then Dr. Spencer Walse from ARS, he really talked about, if we have to treat, particularly with fumigants, what are some of the things we need to think about there? And that's really looking at the product going out the door. But he's actually really pointed out there's actually two areas you need to think about. What are the treatments you need for pests coming in? So typically we fumigate the stockpiles. So like for navel orangeworm or now for Carpophilus beetle. And then we have the storage pests like Indian meal moth and cigarette beetle that typically show up within the facility. And so really he was talking about, hey, if you're going to do fumigation, let's think about what all that needs to, how to meet the phytosanitary requirements. So if you're exporting, you need to make sure you don't have certain pests in it. Which of these tools is appropriate for what conditions? Some take several days to work, some take only a few hours to work. So you really need to understand, again, what's your pest problem, what are you trying to accomplish, and then which of these tools is appropriate for what you're trying to do.
All very important points. From a grower perspective, how is pest control in the field or in the orchard relevant to post-harvest?
Well, the main thing is really coming back to, especially if those nuts are going to be stockpiled, navel orangeworm and Carpophilus beetle, they continue to do their damage unless there's something that stops the larvae from doing their jobs. Okay, and that's really where, so the better growers can do pest management in the field and minimize the amount of pests, of those insects in particular, that come into the stockpiles, the less insect damage you're going to have at that continuing damage. And then you essentially reduce the load on the hull or sheller, or if you don't have your own stockpiles, on how quickly you need to fumigate, how perfect your fumigation has to be, because you just don't start with as high a load. I mean, again, it's that part of that IPM. Essentially, you're part of, as a grower, is like, can I minimize the pests coming in to this whole post-harvest situation through my management practice in the field? And with both of those insects, it really actually starts with winter sanitation for both of them. And you really need to get that winter sanitation done as well as possible. Carpophilus, the nuts really need to be broken down well to prevent them to continue to grow into the growing season. But so really realizing, what do we know about that infield management, again, to prevent it down the line. And then at the end of the day, really what we're talking about is whether that consumer is the actual buyer of the nuts, or if it's an end consumer, the last thing they want to do is look at it and see something crawling around it. I can tell you from personal experience, I remember years ago buying some chocolate with some hazelnuts in it. I'm really looking forward to having it because I hadn't had this particular chocolate in a long time. And I literally had the chocolate just about to my mouth and I saw something crawling. Yeah. And that was, your post-harvest, in this case probably at the retail level. Things hadn't worked. I mean, this is also many years ago. But that is an experience we just don't want either our end customers, but certainly not our end consumers to experience. And so growers have a role to play from what happens in the pest management in the field in terms of preventing whether it's the actual worm crawling and or that insect damage. And we know with navel orange worm that also contributes to aflatoxins. So all of that plays a role in making sure we have a high quality product that reaches the end consumer.
Any other thoughts for our listeners today?
I think one thing that was just hinted at and we didn't get to a full discussion, but Dr. Pan mentioned, the hull piles and the shell piles, but the hull piles in particular are also a source of harborage. And I don't think we have spent enough time really looking at how do we manage pests in those situations and what is that interaction, because, if you place them further away, do you get less chances of those post-harvest pests coming into the actual facility? So, and then the other thing, and again, this is just my knowledge, the other learning thing was, and this was mentioned in the question and answer, is I had not thought about that. Could the shipping container, or could the pallets that are in the shipping container, can they be a source of harborage? So doing crack and treatments of a container before you fill it could be a good way to minimize reinfestations after you've done all the work in the facilities on its way to wherever its final destination is, or at least the next destination of those nuts. That was the other thing that I really hadn't thought about before.
All very important information. And of course, the Almond Board does keep a lot of good information for growers. Where can the growers find that?
So for growers, for the pest management, go to almonds.com and look for the pest management side under grower resources. There's also now the Learning Hub, which is a great website that has a whole bunch of educational materials, and many of them you can get CEU or CCA credits. Come to field days that we do, come to field days from the farm advisors, realizing there on the grower side there's actually a lot of opportunity. I think one thing I should also say, growers should realize they're lucky. The post-harvest pest management guys do not have the same level of educational resources and people to turn to help them know how to do this. We don't have a post-harvest pest management farm advisor. It doesn't exist.
Wouldn't it be nice if it did, though?
Yes, it would.
And I default to saying the growers, but also Almond Board does have a lot of information for others in the ag industry as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I say, I tell people, go take a look at our website for whether it's, whole orchard recycling or cover crops. Yes, it's for almonds or for groundwater recharge, but the principles hold for no matter which tree crop you're growing. I won't get into some of the annual crops that might be different enough. So I do say, yes, take a look, see if there's something there that's useful. Yesterday I heard someone mentioning that they see that growers go a lot to YouTube and use ChatGPT to find things, and I think that's a really good first step. But as always, you also need to make sure you know what the quality is. So see if there's something there that intrigues you, and then see, does the Almond Board or does UCIPM have information that maybe come from a more trusted source to help you take what you learned from ChatGPT and say, okay, now what's really going to work for me?
And that's excellent information. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, thanks.
That again, Gabriele Ludwig, Director of Environmental Affairs with the Almond Board of California. That was this week's Almond Update from the Almond Board. You can find them online at almonds.com. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Wrapping up today with some news. State dairy regulators, veterinarians, and public health officials now have a new and staged testing strategy in efforts to detect and respond to potential H5N1 virus in dairy cattle. Rod Bain reports.
A new national milk testing strategy in conjunction with USDA prevention and response efforts to the H5N1 virus in dairy cattle. What is the intent and end goal? Explanation is provided by Julie Gaudier of USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service.
We've got 5 stages identified. These aren't necessarily linear. States do not have to move through every stage. There's a lot of flexibility. Ultimately, at the end of this process, we want to be able to declare the United States free of avian influenza in dairy cattle.
So what is the breakdown of each stage within this strategy?
Stage 1 starts with monitoring the large tanks, silos at milk processing facilities. We'll be asking dairy regulators, dairy inspectors to sample milk at these processing facilities from each silo that contains milk intended for pasteurization, a screening stage that we want to put in place all across the country.
Stages 2 and 3 of the national milk testing strategy, respectively, involves determination of a state's H5N1 dairy cattle status and detection and response to the virus in affected states.
Stage 2 is something that a state can decide to use to fast track them to demonstrate unaffected status or identify that state as being affected with this virus in their dairy herd. Not only is the state conducting surveillance to identify other infections, but they're also putting in measures to respond quickly and prevent movement of that virus to other herds while that dairy is recovering from the infection.
The strategy's 4th stage involves states unaffected by H5 in dairy cattle demonstrating an ongoing absence of the virus. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's our show for today. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. On behalf of Lori Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halverson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.